Good afternoon, everyone, and we're here at our second panel of Nottingham Comic Con, and today we have Chris Imber from Reckless Hero, Nick Prolix, creator of Sheep and the Wolves, and Sally Jane Thompson, creator of Atomic Sheep. And we're here for the Creating Your Own panel. So as three creators who are known for creating their own unique style of work and fictional characters, what is it that inspires you to create your own comic in the first place? Chris?
Hello. I think for me, it was empowering myself to do it, really. We had it's a very kind of saturated, busy market, but there are always going to be gaps. And I think we wanted to make our own voice. And instead of kind of what I like to call Marvel chasing, we wanted to create something that was our own, that we could be excited about, and that we could push to an audience and be passionate about.
They say that everyone has a story, don't they? Everyone has a story within them. And Nick, do you feel like because yours is a webcomic, isn't it, the Sheep and the Wolves? What brought that idea to your mind first?
Yeah, it's a webcomic, and then I've collected sort of the first chapter in a little sort of anthology comic that I'm plugging because it's on my table outside. It's a comic about Greek white boys from the 60s in North London, right? You go to a publisher, they're just going to laugh you out of the town. It's not only like a niche, it's a niche in a niche in a niche. So the internet was just, I made my first comic when I was 11 and stapled it together and took it around school, and my form tutor took it and showed everyone. And it was just like, oh, fuck. So the internet is just, like that exponentially.
Oh yeah, times 1,000, isn't it? Yeah. So it's faceless as well, isn't it? The internet, whereas in your school you actually knew people and hoping they'd respond well. Yeah,
I like to think, on the internet no one knows you're a dog. Yeah, on the internet no one knows you're a 41-year-old man with a beard, trying to sort of break into comics. It's like.
Well, we all hope for that, don't we? No one wants us to know us that.
Living the dream.
Yeah. And
you look really good for 40.
Yeah.
Sally, so you've created a number of titles, haven't you? So Atomic Sheep, is that the most recent?
No, Atomic Sheep was my very first full-length graphic novel. So it is a few years old now. Actually, this month is its third birthday.
Oh, lovely.
And so since then, I've worked on a few things. Most recently, a story called The Ruby Equation for Fresh Romance, which was a digital romance comics anthology that was running a bunch of stories to try and sort of bring that genre back to comics. And that was working with a writer and a colorist. At the moment, most of my paid work is working with a team, and it's a mix of things, because when you're working with other people, you get those other sensibilities coming in. And I will admit, like Nick, my work the work that I do myself is maybe a little bit niche. So it can be helpful to kind of have that other side of things that is a bit more commercial as well.
What inspired you to break into comics though, rather than, because I know you do some fantastic illustration work, so rather than staying on the route of purely illustration, would be that editorial or decorative, why go into comics then?
It's storytelling, definitely, and I think about finding something that hits all the things that matter to you. So I've been sort of writing stories and drawing and writing poetry and doing all that stuff since I was a kid, and it was a real relief. As I was in my undergrad degree, I did fine art and sort of trying to figure out what direction to go and so on. And I loved so many things that it was frustrating, the idea that if I picked one thing, that would be it, because I'd be working hard on that and there wouldn't be time for all of the other things that I loved. And it was such a relief to figure out that actually with comics, I could still write, I could design, I could draw. There's sort of costume design and sort of all of the things that I enjoyed all in one package. So even if I only have time to do that, which is very much the case, and everything else kind of gets dropped off the side, it's okay, because you found a thing that hits the things that matter to you.
Okay, so you've come up with an idea. Let's say you've come up with an idea of a story that you want to tell. Are there any resources that you might look towards, books or websites or YouTube videos? Because there are all sorts of resources out there these days. Is there anywhere that you would recommend to other people to use as good resources for helping to build that story forward into a full piece of work?
Yeah, I think so. I think the biggest one for me, and it's going to seem a bit of an odd one, is social media. Get yourself onto things like Twitter, speak to people, and surround yourselves with honest people. Because when you create something that nobody's kind of gone the length to create before, you have a lot of people who think, yeah, great, what you've done is great, but actually that criticism is what drives you on and makes you better at your craft. I mean, there's hundreds of books. There was Carl Potts from DC recommended his own book.
Because he would, yeah.
But I've got to say, it's actually really good.
Okay.
I think it's called Drawing the DC Way. It's about storyboarding and the art of the craft, and it is excellent. And it's all little things that you think on an amateur level that you take for granted, but you don't realise that these guys are like pros. They're masters of their craft, and it's what they're looking for, and it's what seamlessly makes their books flow. And you don't realise. You think it's easy, just put a few panels around, you can tell a story, but it's really not. And so reading up on it, talking to creators directly, which sites like Twitter allow you to do, and they're very, very, very forthcoming with advice.
Yeah, it seems can be quite as far as creators go. There's very much a community within Twitter or Facebook or I think there are other websites where people like Tumblr as well. I think people use.
It's not the bubble it's portrayed as. I think comics is very much portrayed in a way that there's a hierarchy that all keep themselves in work constantly, and it's really, really not like that. There are so many people willing to offer advice and so many amazing people who want to give you that help up the ladder and will look at your work and say, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about changing this? Social media, Carl Potts' book.
Nick, is there anything you've come across that may differ from Chris or that you found useful?
I'd say two things. First, on the social media front, I'm like a just sort of fiend for like that sort of dopamine hit of like putting something on Instagram and getting the likes for it. Like I'm just a junkie. But like
a hearts junkie, isn't it?
Yeah,
those little hearts they give you.
I'm doing it for the hearts. Yeah. But like, I also find though that I've drawn a panel and then like I try and post something every night to sort of show this is what I've been doing, and part of it is to just sort of make me accountable. And also the other thing is as soon as you've stuck a weird sort of retro filter on it and it's gone on the internet and you look at it, suddenly I go, oh my god, that it's the balance of the composition is off, something about the pose. It's really almost like an objective second sort of view of your own work, which, it sounds like, well, just take maybe if you got off your phone and spent 5 minutes looking at your work first, you'd have noticed it. But I don't think that's the case. I think it's something about seeing it sort of through the filter of another screen that your brain perceives it differently and you're able to process it differently. So I think that's really helpful. Things that I've found particularly useful have been podcasts. So, I'm going to name check Dan Berry's Make It and Tell Everybody from the last panel, creator interviews, the awesome comics podcast, creator interviews. Just listening to other people sort of talk about their process, I find, sort of massively helpful, even when, just from, what pen do you use down to, I found the printer that I used for my comic from listening to Dan Berry interview, Eleni Carcalotti talking about her mini comic a month project for a year, and she used an online printer, and so I went to them because, it sounded like good enough, and they were great, so, yeah.
Sally? Is there anything that you've found because of your style is very elegant is a strange word to use, but that's what I think of it. I think that the line that you have is very elegant. Is there anyone that you've found that's been drawn you to or led you to that point of your style that other people might find useful, or books or?
Oh, thank you first. Yeah, I think part of it is pulling in influences from a lot of places. Like, I think that element of my work comes from the fact that I love early 20th century Golden Age illustration. And so usually when I'm drawing a book, I'll kind of think about the kind of look and feel I want that book to have, and I'll have like some kind of inspiration pictures that I'll just have around to just kind of remind me of the feel, rather not the style. You're not taking on someone else's style, but there's a feel in kind of other work that you might want to kind of just keep in your mind while you're drawing. But yeah, in terms of style, it's such an organic thing that it's probably the least, like the style is probably the element that's least influenced by sort of research and learning. That's the more kind of organic side of it. In terms of the research and learning, yeah, there are amazing resources within comics, which the guys have already touched on. Podcast-wise, I also want to mention Comics Manifest, which I've been listening to a lot lately, is really good.
So who creates that?
Aaron
podcast?
Williams, and he's got an incredible roster of creators talking to him, and he seems to do it about weekly. So that's a really good one I've been listening to. And I've also been listening to one called Creative Pep Talk. I think Andy Miller, it's an illustration-focused one rather than comics, but has a lot of really great sort of in-depth creative talk about sort of why you create and what you really want out of life, out of your creative life, and it's been really helpful for me lately. And I also love sort of reading about storytelling in a more general sense as well. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can only learn by looking specifically at comics, but there's also a lot of stuff about storytelling in a general sense that kind of applies across all media. So things like, there's the really well-known sort of screenwriting books like Save the Cat and so on. I really, really love a book called Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald, which is completely about sort of the heart of storytelling and knowing what your story is about at its core and how that comes first and will affect every element of the plot and what you're showing and why. And I think that kind of thing is really useful to just come back to regularly in a way, because you're thinking about why you're creating the book you're creating in the first place.
Because there can be with all sorts of storytelling. I think we see it sometimes in TV shows that run on a bit too long, or in films that seem to amble their way through the reason they're doing it. Do you find that sometimes there can be an ambiguity about what the destination is of their story? They haven't actually thought about the finishing. They've thought about how they want to start it, but don't realise how they want to finish it. Is there anything that you guys could sort of pass on in knowledge of a way of? Is it more that you come up with the ending first and the beginning comes after that, or do you find that your process works differently, that you come up with the start and then gradually becomes the end? Or
yeah, don't watch Lost. Yeah, I think I start at the end. I always have an idea of what I want to tell, what I want to happen, and sometimes. The nature of storytelling is sometimes an avenue appears that you never really expected to appear, and sometimes you want to pursue that avenue. And you have to be quite rigorous with yourself and think, no, this is the story I wanted to tell this time, that I could go back and tell that story at another stage. But I think it is important to have an idea of where you're going. Otherwise, you lead people on a merry journey, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, a journey is the most exciting part of any kind of viewing or reading. I kind of dislost a bit there, but actually, I loved watching that TV show, and the fact that it didn't have a clear, concrete ending actually didn't worry me that much. But you can cheat people if you're not heading somewhere secure, I think, is my kind of 2 pence worth.
It's an interesting point, because life doesn't have an ending. It doesn't have a 3 or 5 act structure, does it? You know,
Mine does.
no, yours is a happy ending, personally.
Well, occasionally, yeah.
So that might be for a printing thing, but Nick, yours is a webcomic. Do you see that differently? Is that you would rather keep the story rolling as it comes along and things come to mind?
Yeah,
how it progresses?
There's like, Doonesbury was like a big kind of influence to me, like as a model, just because, I still don't know what Doonesbury's about. Like, I don't get the references. And I was reading that when I was like 16, at school, trying to look intellectual. So I got The Guardian, and like I just didn't know, what it was about. I didn't know who these characters really were. But I just liked. And then you find out, that Trudeau's been doing it since the 60s, and these characters have, and it's been like sort of 50 years of like sort of just knocking this stuff out and just sort of day in, day out. And so coming to the webcomic, initially, I wanted to tell the stories that my mum and dad told me about when they came to England, when they came to London, but I didn't want to do a sort of slice of life like autobiographical comic, and so I was stuck. And then I found a novel, like this sort of pulp paperback from the 60s, and I stole the plot. I thought it's good. It's good enough for Tarantino, right? And then I told my friend this, and she was like, "You stole the plot, yeah. What was the name of the novel?" And I was like, "It's The Sheep and the Wolves." And she's like, "Are you an idiot? What? If you called your comic the same name as the novel you've stolen the plot from?" And I was like, I hadn't thought of that.
Is the writer still alive? Is the writer still alive?
No one knows what's happened to him. No? He's like disappeared after he made like these three
Did you make him
novels.
Disappear?
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
He's disappeared.
Yeah. and so I guess it's kind of like I had this structure that I was going to sort of follow, because I thought, well, this is great. I can hang these stories off of this kind of sort of pulpy plot. And then very quickly, like, I'd forget what the plot of the novel was, because the story was going in these different directions.
Going in your own direction, absolutely, yeah.
And it's kind of like having the sort of bit like, you've got the scaffold, and at some point you take it off, you have the training wheels, they come, whatever analogy you want for it. But in terms of like, if you're having an ending in sight, I go to each page, and I stole this. It's not, Darwin Cook talked about his Parker novel adaptations, and talking about working it out on the page. Like, so I don't have a script. I don't sort of thumbnail it particularly beforehand. I literally just sort of, rule up the page and just sort of work out what's going to happen, and then. Even down to what people say kind of depends on how the drawing's gone. So it's a very kind of, in some ways, improvised process, which, touch wood, at the minute it seems to work. But, it's a kind of, it's got a little bit of a sort of edge to it. You're never quite sure if, the page is going to come together. And, so far, touch wood.
One day at a time, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like, the adage of one day at a time. Because Sally, your books are quite driven by location. It seems to be from and here and now. You focused in on a particular location or a part of the world, and driven the story around that. Because it's set in South Africa. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and it's to do with, and you were going around meeting family, or.
Yeah. So From was one of my very first self-published comics, which was kind of a memoir about going back to South Africa, where I grew up with my husband, so he could see where I grew up, and also thinking about all the kind of sort of mixed identity stuff that goes with that when you've moved around a lot.
So that, when we were talking about sort of seeing the beginning and end, that's quite structured, isn't it? Because it's to do with memoirs, and there is a beginning, there's an end.
Yeah, travel memoirs
set.
are brilliant in that sense, because if you're traveling for a finite time, then you have an automatic ending, even if your trip is quite rambling and you don't manage to like solve some particular interpersonal conflict that you're having. It still has an ending. But yeah, I do think sort of working in a structure. Like stories will tend to have a shape anyway, even though life is quite random, and in a travel journal there'll be plenty of stuff going on that has nothing to do with whatever you're mainly feeling or dealing with. You'll often find it's actually quite organic and quite easy to bring things into an ending that feels like an ending. Just the fact of having that ending in time kind of helps your thinking come around to an ending as well.
Is there a place you'd like to go to and do a story around? Any
Oh,
country
so many.
quite fancy?
I haven't been to Japan yet, so
Japan.
I
Tell me
really
about it.
love
Japan
to
would
go
be great.
and do some journal comics there.
So you all have quite different sorts of products that you produce. Chris, yours, The Last Sheriff, in fact, isn't it? That came out quite recently, wasn't it, last month?
Issue
This month?
3 came out, yeah,
Issue 3, that was it.
about 2 months ago.
2 months ago,
Yeah.
that was it. So single issues have a particular sort of scheduling, and I imagine webcomics have a very different sort of scheduling. How do you guys balance that about creating the work of in such a different sort of fashion? Is there a particular thinking around it, or do you have sort of strict guidelines about how you get the work put together and out on time if you have the schedule, or is it ready when it's ready?
We Reckless Hero, we have a rough schedule.
Okay.
But this is, not to trick anybody, this is not full time.
Yes.
It's something that we do as a hobby that's progressed to something more. So we prioritize it. We make time. We sacrifice a lot. It's like if you want to be an amazing guitar player, you sit in your room and you play guitar. I draw for hours a day, and I create. I just make things. I'll scrap things. I'll start again. But we try and aim for roughly like 6 months-ish per issue, and we're just kind of steamrolling ahead to our first trade. But I would imagine it's quite different, webcomic based.
Yeah, I mean, it's so I teach, and then in the evenings I draw, draw little pictures, as my mum says, and yeah, I've got a weekly schedule. I'm supposed to come out on Thursdays, and I hit that most weeks. But yeah, it's about no, I can't come out. Sorry, why not? I've got to get a page out. And the summer was good. I sort of went on hiatus, drew a little picture of my main character in a deck chair and told everyone I was on summer holiday. And I spent 6 weeks stockpiling this buffer of pages, which basically meant I could get the print comic produced this month, which has just been doing that because I had those pages sat there. I've now eaten up my buffer again, so I'm back to kind of square one. But
Because what's the release schedule on Sheepmores? Is it weekly? Or
So the website updates every Thursday.
Every Thursday. Nice. Okay. Yeah, it's a good time. And Sally, yours is quite sort of self-contained stories. So is it? Do you try and set yourself that schedule, saying I want it out by a certain date, or just ready when it's ready?
Yeah, it's a real mix. So I've actually got a bit of everything in terms of schedule-wise. So the one my kind of day job one at the moment is my first 24-page a month monthly, and where it's creator-owned. So we're kind of having to kind of figure it out on our own. So we're doing things very far in advance, and we have a schedule, but obviously you have to sort of make money in the meantime, and life gets in the way. So we've got like a rough schedule, but we're sort of sensitive to the fact that everyone on the team has their own needs, and it won't be announced until we've got several issues completely in the can, and then it can go to a more regular schedule. But then the next book I've got lined up after that is a graphic novel, and that has a schedule set up with the editor. I'm kind of fortunate in that both of these things are kind of my full-time job at the moment.
Lovely.
So I can actually look at the rate I work and say, I can do this many pages in a week, therefore we need this many weeks for this section, and just set up a strict schedule. And it's really nice having someone that you owe those pages to, because it helps keep you on schedule. So even if you're doing things independently, if you've got a friend who can be your editor, even just in the fact of, even if they're too busy to have a really good look at your pages, just to kind of like, I'll send you this many pages by this date, and who can just kind of poke you gently and see if you're on track, it's a massive help.
There's nothing like debt to keep you
exactly.
you on time with things.
And guilt.
So we'd like to open up the questions to anyone on the floor here. If anyone's going to stick your hand up, and my lovely assistant over here will come and find you. Anyone at all? Any questions for our guests? Go on, if you go on. Go on then, Tony.
How have you improved? So you've all been in creating comics since you were very young mostly. How do you make sure that you improve? Because it's easy to sit there and draw the same face shapes, draw the same building again, isn't it?
You have my dad. No, you've got to have a self-awareness. I think you've got to have something where you are self-critical, not to a debilitating point, because I think you have to have self-belief as well. But you do need discipline, and that's it, it's discipline. You need to be able to go back to it again and again and again and say, that's not right, that's not perfect, upgrade something, work on, if you're working on expression, work on noses, work on eyebrows, and then when they become far better, then that makes your eye work look out of alignment, so you work on that. Take advice, go and see people. I've recently done portfolio reviews, and that was a massive help, and the best thing was it was disarming for them, because when I walked in to have a portfolio review, it's like, not after work, just tell me how to get better. And that seemed, they just sat back and went, oh right, okay, you're not chasing this, you want to just improve and do it. The best piece of advice I ever had was make comics. If you want to be in comics, make comics. And there's an industry spotlight on creator-owned anyway at the moment, but that's how you get better. Your first one is probably going to be terrible. Your second one, if you're anything like me, is probably going to be terrible. Your third one, there's a glimmer of hope. Fourth one, you ruin it all and it's terrible. Fifth one, you just get better and better, I think, yeah.
It's that quote I heard, we start off savages, we move to big peasants, and then we get better.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, what about you, Nick?
It's that, it's the old 10,000 hours chestnut, isn't it? It's hours in the chair. You've got to sort of just, everyone's got an idea. Everyone knows how to make everyone's got an idea for the next best film, and the great. You want to make a comic, you've got to sit in the chair for however many hours it takes to get it done. Then you print it, then you do the next. Like you say, you just keep going. But it's just, when I say it's work, it's what work should be. It's you kind of it's that creative, expending that energy, in a productive way, and just day in, day out, and that's
So, I mean, there's a school of thought that says that writers or creators block is the lack of imagination and a little bit of laziness. Is that something you agree with, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of different views on creators' block, so I do want to be kind of sensitive to people who who do really kind of go through difficult times. But yeah, I do think it's mostly you just sit down and do the work. And I think in terms of creators' block, I guess if you are sitting down every day and doing the work anyway, then the equivalent is that sometimes you just go through a patch where, like, it's like an alien has possessed your hand and nothing is coming out right, and you just like can't solve something and nothing feels right, and that just is what it is. Sometimes you're on a deadline when that happens, and you just have to do the best you can and send them in, and a lot of the time nobody will notice. And that's not the same as kind of like letting yourself off the hook and putting in subpar work. You're always kind of wanting to push yourself and do your best, but also sort of it's, to a large extent, that kind of battle is with yourself. It won't be as visible to other people looking in from the outside as it feels like it is. But yeah, in terms of getting better and practice and so on, I also like to kind of give myself assignments because with comics, there's so much to think about, there's so much to do, we're all busy. I don't have time to study and train, even though I would like to. So yeah, I'll give myself like one assignment at a time where I have to do these pages anyway. So here's this one area that I know I'm weak in. Like years ago, I had a portfolio review where the editor mentioned sort of trying out different mark making so that the texture of a tree looked a lot different than the texture of a leather jacket and so on. So when I was doing the pages I was doing anyway, I just had that in mind and tried to improve on that and push myself on that and look at other people's drawings and look at comics I admired and see what kind of marks they were making and try things out. And then last year I had some advice from an editor that I was using too many straight-on shots and to kind of basically move my camera around more. So for the last year or so, as I go through my roughs, I'll just kind of check for that and try and push it a bit more and bring in a bit more variety. And sort of sometimes that's about like one challenge to yourself is about the most you can do, and you don't have time to kind of spend hours thinking over each page. But it's still, over time, it still builds up and it still helps a lot.
Lovely. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, we've got one at the back. We turned it on, Tony, flip the switch. Oh, lovely. Thanks, darling.
When you're creating an original character, how does your thought process begin?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I just start drawing. That sounds really bad, but I do. I just start drawing, and then there'll be an element of something that I really like, and then I'll carry that forwards and adapt it and change it, and then try different things. Like if I've tried a head that I think works, I'll try it with a different body, or then I'll try and think of the character as a whole, what I want to achieve with the character. In the last Sheriff 3, we've just introduced a character called Strucker, and he was supposed to be a priest that's kind of given up on what he believed in because of how downtrodden he is. But so he had to be somebody who kind of emotionally and physically let himself go a little bit. And that kind of has to come through in the character. So his body has to tell a story. You see lots of characters that are designed to look cool, to look amazing. They've got bits coming off them all over the place, but actually the purpose of them doesn't match what they are intended for. So yeah, I think purpose is a really important one, but trial and error as well.
So it becomes a sort of soul of the character that comes through.
It has to. It has to. You can generally, I think you can generally tell quite outgoing people by the way that they stand, the way that they are. You can tell people who are feeling low and miserable because their body language suggests so. You know, it's all comes through.
So there's normally like two ways in which characters sort of develop or have developed in the comics so far. First is I've taken to sort of just sketching people as I'm watching films. So like I watch a lot of old movies and old TV shows, and there's be someone with a great face, so I'll just nick the face, or someone with a a cool hat, and I'll nick that, and the way they're stood, and then you kind of start to build a story around that person. It's like you get a snapshot of them, and it's like, well, who are they? What do they want? All that sort of stuff. And the other way has been like there's a strip a few months ago, and I put a character in the background. So the two guys were talking in the front, a guy and a girl were talking in front, and there was a character in the background. I just sort of drew this figure, and then I was kind of like, well, who's that? What are they doing there? And I was like, well, he's her brother. He's come to pick her up. And so suddenly this character now had a brother, and and he was tetchy, and so we sort of developed the story. Just going back to that, work it out on the page. The next page next week had this whole new character, and now I've got this little side plot where he's going to come back, and cool shenanigans will ensue.
He's just emerged out of the background.
Yeah, he literally just sort of appeared on the page.
Brilliant, love that.
I have kind of a backwards process on this, because I know a lot of people, their stories do start with a character first, and there isn't really like a right order of things. So for me, the character is almost the last step, because it's about kind of what topics are interesting to me, what ideas are interesting to me, what do I write about, and from that there's kind of the general story will come out, and then some general plot points, and then it's like, well, this story is about the sort of person who would do these things, or who would be looking at these ideas, so what kind of person is that, and develop the character from there. And once I know what kind of person they are, then I can figure out what they look like, because like as Chris was saying, that's sort of really, really connected. So visually, you've got so much communication on a comics page, just in how a character dresses, how they do their hair, that you can use to tell people sort of pages worth of information about that character. But yeah, it is always sort of an area I need to push myself in, because because for me, the ideas and the experiences that I want to communicate are what comes first. So sort of creating more iconic characters, or characters that people will love, that's the area that needs the extra push. Whereas for a lot of people, they come up with these characters that they love before there's any kind of story or anything attached. And then for them, the area they need to push is finding a story that's meaningful, that can attach to those.
Very good. Do we have any last questions at all? Okay, so we've got time for one more. So each of the creators, we asked them this earlier. If you were going to create a comic about a television show, it can be animated, could be live action, what is it, and why have you done it?
Right.
I can't say A League from Coronation
No, I'm really glad that something just popped into my head
Oh,
because
good.
I was going to say Coronation Street. But actually, that's not a bad answer because I'd like to do something with it. That's something that nobody would expect me to do. So I'd quite like that. But I can't think of somebody who wouldn't like a crack at Stranger Things from Netflix. I'd love to do
that's
that.
brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, that's probably captured my attention. So yeah, I'd love to do that.
Stranger Things.
Columbo.
Does every issue end with the just one more thing?
Every page.
Every
ends
page.
with- Bottom right hand corner.
I
just-
want Columbo too.
You can have Marple. You can have Miss Marple.
And also because I've got to get better at drawing kind of like, folds in clothes. So like,
Trench
rumpled
coats. Lots of
raincoat
trench coats,
is the way to do it. Yeah.
Sally, you got?
Yeah,
one?
I'm going to say 2 because my first one I couldn't use anyway because it's already from a comic in the first place. But there's this Japanese drama called Waka Kozake, which is basically about a kind of working woman in her 20s who loves going out to izakayas and little bars and so on to eat and drink by herself. And it's just these kind of soliloquies about the food that she's eating and the sake that she's drinking and just enjoying those things. And it's so wonderful and so relaxing. It was a manga originally, so that's not an option. But
right.
in the same vein, I passionately love all of the programs that you get on British TV about trains and travel. Like the Michael Portillo's
do a
Great
comic about
Continental
Michael
Railway
Portillo,
Journeys.
yeah.
And sort of, Michael Portillo doesn't have to be in it, but I would love someone to give me some money to go and make some non-fiction comics about traveling on trains.
He has
I would
the
like
most
that a lot.
fantastic dress sense. I don't know
Yes.
what the last one. He was,
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it was like a child had coloured him in. It
Yeah.
was just all primary colours. Brilliant, fantastic. Well, fantastic guests here. So please, Chris Imber, Nick Prolix, and Sally Jane Thompson. Thank you very much.